If you're preparing for coding interviews right now, chances are you're doing it wrong. If you think that going through hundreds of leak code problems is the only way to actually succeed in coding interviews, I'm here to tell you there is a smarter way to prepare. If you're new here, my name is Elsa and I'm a software engineer working in big tech. This is the kind of advice that I don't see enough on the internet. These tips helped me get my own big tech offer, and I've used them to help other engineers land theirs too. So stick around, because these 5 tips will completely change the way you prepare for coding interviews. Learn patterns, not problems. A big mistake people make early on is just grinding through leak code problems like crazy, one after the other. And what ends up happening is that they just memorize the solution behind the problem, but not the actual why behind the problem. And let's be honest, the odds of that exact problem showing up in your interview are basically 0. Instead, what will show up are problems that fall into the same patterns. Think of it like math class. When you see an equation, you don't panic because you haven't seen that exact one before. You just recognize, oh, this is a quadratic equation. It's the same with coding interviews, really. You want to reach the point where you see a problem and go, oh, this is tree traversal, or this is a sliding window problem. Once you can label it into one pattern, the solution starts to unfold naturally. So a much more efficient way to approach preparing for interviews is to use a learning resource that organizes problems by pattern. So you can first understand the logic behind the problem and then do some practice exercises. Great resources for this are books like Cracking the Code in Interview, or one of my favorite courses, Educative's Grokking the Code in Interview Patterns, which literally has a complete roadmap that goes through all problem patterns. Full transparency, Educative is not sponsoring this video. I just think it's a great platform, but you can find an affiliate link in my bio for an additional 10% discount in case you're interested. Also, just a note, I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing leak code problems at all. In fact, leak code is a great question bank, and you can use it to practice, but only once you've actually understood the patterns. Spaced repetition. A lot of people approach practicing problems in the wrong way because they're trying to be perfectionists. For example, they'll tell themselves, I can't move to dynamic programming until I've mastered every single array problem. And the issue is, that's not how learning works. You're not supposed to go chapter by chapter and then go to the next one and then go to the next one. This is not school, okay? We're trying to maximize your chances of actually getting a job. So in order to give yourself the highest chance of actually passing the interview, you want to first try to go as broad as possible before going in depth into topics. Because you don't actually know what they're going to be asking in your interview. You'll be better set if you at least know something than if you're just an expert on arrays but then know nothing about dynamic programming, for example. You at least want to have some basic grasp of all of them, and then depending on the time you have, you go in depth into a few kind of problems. And I know how hard it can be to memorize patterns, and so the way that I found easier to make these patterns stick in my brain is by using recall and spaced repetition. So the way our brains work is that learning sticks better if you space it out over time. And you might say, hey, but if I space it out over time, I might find it really hard to remember what the solution was for this problem, right? And that is exactly what you want. The struggle before remembering something helps your brain build a stronger memory trace. So if you just learned a new pattern today, instead of trying to practice it tomorrow, try practicing problems out of this pattern in a couple of days or in 3 days. And if you manage to remember, that on its own, that extra effort that you put into remembering will make it stick longer. So the way that I would approach it is I would create a table with 3 columns, like the one that you're seeing on the screen right now. In the first column, we have the problem type, so you know into which pattern this particular problem falls into. Then we have a column for the specific problem. It can be a leak code problem, or it can be from a book, or it can be from Educative's course that I showed you earlier. And the last and most important column is the date that you practiced the problem. So as you can see, each of the dates has a color. And I will assign this color depending on how well I did while solving it. I'll use red color if I struggled or couldn't solve it at all. I'll use yellow if I got the problem, but it took me a long time or needed some hints. And I'll use green if I was able to solve it smoothly. The key is to revisit the red and yellow problems after a few days, and then after a week, and then after a couple of weeks. This really depends on how much time you have before the interviews. For example, if I was able to solve a problem on my first try, like the binary search row, for example, then I wouldn't be revisiting this problem. Since we don't have a lot of time, it's way better for us to focus on problems that we're not able to solve yet. So if this was my actual practice table. And today I had to practice. I would look at this table and be like, okay, so I haven't practiced linked list yet. So let me do that first. And then I'll practice intervals because I did quite bad the other day. And that's a way that ensures that you'll be learning at least a bit of each pattern before going into the interview, which will maximize your chances of doing well. Practice out loud. Here's one that almost nobody does. This is, for me, one of the best tips that I can give someone preparing for coding interviews. So, in the day of the interview, you're expected to talk while you're coding. The interviewer wants to understand what your thinking process is. Often, they're even more interested in understanding how you think and how you would approach the problem, instead of seeing your final solution. But talking while coding is a skill on its own. It's not something natural. Nobody does this on a daily basis. I'm never sitting on my laptop being like, okay, so now I'm gonna add the string. No, we usually code in silence and no one's used to it. And you really don't want the day of your interview to be the first day that you're speaking out loud while coding. It's very unnatural and you want to practice this first at home. And especially if English is not your first language. I can't stress this enough. It will help you build confidence. English is not my first language. So while I was practicing for my coding interview, I was practicing out loud, making sure that I was able to express whatever I wanted to say in a more or less fluent way, so the interviewer could understand me and I wouldn't feel super awkward about it. When you're in an interview, you're super nervous. The last thing that you want to think about is, oh, how do I say recursion in English or something like that. It will feel super awkward at first because you're gonna be speaking out loud at home, but trust me, that is exactly why you need to do it before the interview. Emulate the real scenario. Your prep should look as much as the real thing as possible, which means you want to set timers while practicing. You want to have that tension of having to be fast. The day of the interview, you'll have a limited amount of time. That can be 20 minutes, it can be half an hour. So make sure that you time yourself. Another thing that you should take into account is you don't want to be practicing on your usual IDE. The day of the interview, you won't have any hints or help that your IDE might be giving you. So you want to use something like Google Docs or a text editor online that doesn't give you any hints, so you can emulate the real scenario as much as possible. If you have any friends that are practicing for their interviews, you can even practice with each other and do mock interviews. So yeah, just find ways to emulate the real thing as much as possible. Use Glassdoor as a filter. A hack that not a lot of people know, which actually surprises me, is that there's this platform called Glassdoor where employees and candidates can share reviews about the interviewing process, compensation, and a lot of people share the questions that they got the day of the interviews. So my advice is that the last days before your actual interview, you search the specific company that you'll be interviewing for on Glassdoor and just take a look at the kind of questions that they're asking. Is it more trees? Is it more graphs? And this can help you filter what kinds of problems you should be practicing the last few days before the interview. Of course, you're not guaranteed that these are going to appear the day of the interview, but it can serve as a guideline because some companies tend to ask questions on certain topics or certain patterns. So in that sense, Glassdoor can help you sift through the noise and focus only on the topics that actually matter for that company. I hope these tips help you prepare for your coding interview. And don't forget to check out the discount in the description down below for a 10% off of Educative's course. As always, I'm rooting for you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.